Friends, I see my good friend Jeffrey here, and Jeffrey, I'm going to invite you to come on up for a second. Jeffrey gave me, a couple of weeks ago, a spinner. Now, if you don't know what a spinner is one of the latest things that we do to occupy our time. And it's a great thing, but he gave it to me just as I was getting ready to go on a trip that included going to a meeting with Aaron Hawkins in New Mexico, and then from there I went to Florida, where my uncle had died, and I was there for the service, and then I came back to the Council of Bishops meeting. So this has been to 3 different states after leaving New Jersey. But also, while I was away, there was a tragedy in my family, and I had this, and every time I saw it, I thought of you, and just your love and your care for me. So thank you. You loaned this to me, because I know this was one of your favorite spinners, and so I'm returning it to you today, and in appreciation.
You a fidget spinner, a purple one for the
A
bishop.
purple fidget spinner.
Yeah.
Wow, a purple one. Now, did you get me a purple one because I'm a bishop? Is that right? Because that's the color of bishops, you know? We get purple. Well, this one looks very special, and it's got some nice flash and dash to it. So I'll have a lot of fun with this. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Appreciate you and your continued life in the church. We pray God's blessing upon you as well. All right? Jeffrey not only has 2 proud parents, but he is also very proud of his parents, one was ordained and the other was commissioned this past week, and so we're grateful for your mom and dad as well. All right? Thanks for hanging out with us. We're going to go to a video now.
Our church has been connected to a group in New Jersey called First Friends, which is a group that supports refugees, both those who are coming in to reside and those who are essentially incarcerated and are waiting decisions on whether they can be admitted. Our congregation has decided through First Friends to connect up with detainees in this prison system and visit them about every 2 weeks.
Our immigration and naturalization system incarcerates people seeking asylum in our country, and it struck me as such a human right violation.
More and more you realize that, this is a person with other aspects of their life, because as you speak with the detainees, you realize, they had a whole other life in another country. But the visit is about uplifting them while they're there and keeping them in positive spirits. And I'm pretty good at doing that, so I really enjoy doing it.
Oh, tonight's really exciting. So I guess, almost 2 years ago, we had the opportunity to host the Alargas, a Syrian family. So we put together an apartment in Montclair. When we were in Montclair, we started partnering with a temple, and they started this thing called Syrian Supper Club. Syrian cooks come to your house, they put on a great spread, and the cook gets the revenue to buy the different things for the dinner, as well as then any profit she gets to keep after. So I invited a bunch of my friends from Morrow Church, and they're all coming here to enjoy great Syrian food.
And I can't wait to test this, because one of this, it's my favorite, especially this one.
My name is Abdul Alarga. I'm a Syrian man.
I came to the United States in 2013, fled from my country, Syria, just because of the war.
Abdul Alarga is the entrepreneur of 7 different companies in Damascus, and also has a PhD from Lebanon in political science. But at some point, he made what President Assad considered to be a direct affront, and that is that he started a home or an institution in support of widows of the insurgency. The government saw that as an affront and began to close down his businesses and began to hunt him.
I fled at midnight and came to the United States without knowing anybody. I left my family there. I don't have even any single chance to say to them goodbye. When I was in the New York City streets for the first time, I asked myself, where should I go? Left, right, north, south, everything is the same.
He arrived in New York City with $400 and a laptop computer and struggled for 2 years to try to get on his feet. Was homeless for a while.
My wife and kids spent almost a year and a half running away from them in the city where the missiles and shelters came from the sky every day. My wife and my kids are everything I have in this life, everything.
Eventually, after 2 years, he was awarded asylum, and a week later, his family was on the plane.
One New Jersey community welcomed a family this week, despite Governor Christie saying he doesn't want them in New
Jersey will not accept Syrian refugees. Governor Christie wrote the president just over a week ago. That same day, the Morrow Church Council in Maplewood voted unanimously to help sponsor a family of Syrian refugees.
We wanted to be a voice that would say, no, you are welcome, and how can we make you feel welcome?
I remember when she came out from JFK Airport, I kneed on the ground and start to kiss her legs and my kids' legs.
One of the great things was that a lot of people around the community heard what we were doing, and our phones were ringing off the hook. People wanted to help. And one of my favorite stories is that a young Jewish boy found out about the Syrian family. So the young Jewish boy gave a donation to the Christian church to help a Muslim family. So it's really been wonderful bringing people together like that.
Dean is a very close friend to me. We used to call this kind of relation in Arabic is like a brother, but not from my mother. He loved my kids so much. My little daughter believes that he is her grandfather.
Well, it's not just me. It's sort of grandfather and a bunch of cousins.
Even his church and even his friends also. We thought that we know these people from long time ago. Jesus, me as a Muslim, we know Jesus very much, and I can tell you, frankly and honestly, what I have received from this church, for me, is like I received it by the Jesus himself.
I think justice for us, if you think in a broad terms, is you have something, work that's meaningful to you, you have a way to earn a living, you have food, you have shelter. So justice is really what we work for, is to make sure that other people have all of that.
Matthew 25, Christ says, "Come, ye blessed, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was in prison and you visited me." And then Christ says, if you've done it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. Essentially saying, if you want to welcome Christ in your life, this is how you do it. Because of the blessing of the Alarga family and the lives of this church, we can rejoice in the application of justice.
I would like the members of Morrow Church, clergy of Morrow Church, just to stand. We might recognize you. There they are. I would also like a person, any people from a congregation that works on immigration or refugee concerns, matters, just also stand that we might recognize you today. Any congregation working on refugees, sanctuary movement, immigration, please stand that we might recognize you today. You have taken the words of Jesus seriously to welcome the stranger. And you do this work on the church's behalf, and we're so grateful for what you're doing and pray for your continued work. Now with me on the stage here is a friend of mine, and this is Justice Gary Stein, retired Supreme Court Justice from New Jersey, who was appointed by Governor Kane to serve on the Supreme Court, and he served for 17 years. And amen. And Justice Stein and I got to meet through Drew University's board, where he's a member of the board and I'm a member of the board. And so we get to share meals together and conversations around those board meetings. And he's told me a lot about himself. And one of the things he told me was that he went to Duke to get his degree in law, which is, again, is another United Methodist school, right? And he also told me that he's working on a very important project and bringing leadership to that project right now. And that is the integration of public schools in New Jersey. That we are one of the most segregated school districts in the nation here in New Jersey. With all of our diversity, we are one of the most segregated school systems. So I wanted him to talk about that project so we as United Methodists would be aware, and that also we could begin to think about how our congregations could get involved. Thank you very much for being with us today. We're glad to have you.
Bishop Scholl, I'm so grateful for the invitation and for the chance to speak here this morning. I arrived last night. We had dinner together, and I heard the beginning of your program this morning, and I feel as if I've learned so much already. I was impressed so much to learn that the United Methodist Church was inspired by its desire for desegregation. I thought that Aaron's presentation was wonderful, the video was provocative, and her message was inspiring. And I was delighted to see that short video that demonstrated that your church is defying the governor and welcoming immigrants to the United States. I was especially struck by Aaron's use of the bridge building analogy. As many of you know, we've had some bridge problems in New Jersey these past few years.
I've never told a justice before, but you're starting to meddle. Stay to the script. Stay to the script.
You know, I've been speaking publicly most of my life, starting with my bar mitzvah in 1946. But never do I believe I've spoken in front of a crowd as large as this. And that's appropriate because the subject that I'm going to talk to you about is a very serious and important subject. And as Bishop Scholl mentioned, I want to address the fact that New Jersey has among the most intensely segregated public schools, segregated by both race and poverty, of any state in the nation, more segregated than any state south of the Mason-Dixon line, the states where that were affected by the United States Supreme Court's ruling in Brown against the Board of Education. And my opinion is that this situation represents an abysmal failure on the part of our state's leadership over decades, and one that I believe needs to be corrected. And I know that that correction will take time, effort, and understanding, but I'm convinced that the effort to remediate our intense school segregation can't be delayed any longer. Let me begin with some statistics to give you some idea of the dimension of the problem. And then I'll try to explain the background and how we got where we are. There are about 1,375,000 public school students in New Jersey today. Approximately 46% are white, about 16% are black, about 26% are Latino, about 10% are Asian. Of the black students, who number approximately 215,000, a quarter of those students, about 54,000, attend schools that are more than 99% non-white. And another 50,000 of those black students attend schools that are over 90% non-white. In total, about 100,000 of our black public school students, 46% of all the black students in New Jersey, go to schools that are more than 90% non-white. And the statistics for Latino children are equally alarming. Of the 360,000 Latino students in public schools, about 14.5%, 52,000 Latino students attend schools that are over 99% non-white, and another 100,000 Latino students attend schools over 90% non-white. In the aggregate, about 150,000 of all of our Latino students go to schools that are over 90% non-white. So taken together, we have about 250,000 black and Latino students in New Jersey who attend 90% or more non-white schools, and approximately 80% of those students come from families with incomes below the poverty level. Now, experts in public education have studied racially segregated high-poverty school for decades. And we know from that research that those schools are very likely to fail. And there are several reasons for that. For one, those schools have a hard time keeping highly qualified teachers. They have much higher levels of teacher turnover, and teachers are the foundation of good schools. And it's understandable because those schools have significant issues with student discipline, attendance, and low test scores. And for talented teachers that are interested in high student achievement, there's often a level of frustration that causes those teachers to be reluctant to continue their careers in schools that are performing poorly. Those schools often have inadequate facilities and learning materials. All too often, they lack strong parental support. And another factor is that there's often lacking a culture of success in schools highly segregated by race and poverty. Students may have a hard time finding peers that diligently complete their homework, strive to attain high scores on tests, and are motivated to graduate high school and attend college. And because test scores often are low, we find schools segregated by race and poverty focus disproportionately on preparing students for the next series of tests. The research demonstrates convincingly schools that are disproportionately segregated by race and poverty simply have a hard time succeeding in educating their students. Now, on the other hand, we also have decades of social science research that tells us that minority students who come from families below the poverty level do significantly better when they attend schools that are racially and socioeconomically diverse. Let me read you a summary of that research by Rosalind Mickelson, a professor of public policy at the University of North Carolina. And I'm quoting, "The preponderance of scholarly studies, especially those that are methodologically sound, offer consistent findings that irrespective of an ethnicity, race, or social class, students are more likely to make academic gains in mathematics, reading, and science by attending diverse schools and learning in diverse classrooms rather than in segregated ones. Students who attend diverse K-12 schools are more likely to attend and graduate from college. The most disadvantaged youth receive the greatest academic benefits from diverse schooling. At the same time, there is overwhelmingly consistent evidence that young people from all racial and ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds benefit socially from attending diverse schools, and none suffer from it. Students who attend integrated schools exhibit greater levels of friendships, demonstrate lower levels of racial fears, and experience less intergenerational perpetuation of racism and stereotypical relationships." End of quote. So if there is such a widespread consensus that minority students that attend racially and socioeconomically diverse schools do better academically and achieve better social understanding of their peers from different backgrounds, why then do we have such highly segregated public schools in New Jersey? The background is complicated. It's not well known that in the 1930s and 1940s, right here in New Jersey, most of the municipalities with significant black populations in the southern part of the state, Trenton and South, had racially segregated schools, even though state law has prohibited segregation since the 1880s. Trenton High School had two schools, one for black students, one for white students. Segregation in southern New Jersey was widespread. Now that ended in the 40s and early 50s, of course, because the Supreme Court decided Brown against Board of Education that made it clear that segregated schools violated the United States Constitution. Also, it's important to understand that in New Jersey, after World War II, there was widespread housing development in our suburbs. Before the war, the largest cities in New Jersey actually had the best school systems in the state. Newark, Trenton, Camden, Patterson, Elizabeth, Passaic, all had outstanding public school systems. But after the war, as residents began to move out to the suburbs, those cities lost their tax base. And yet, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the state of New Jersey funded public education solely on the basis of property taxes. The result was that the city's tax base deteriorated, funding for public schools diminished, and so did the quality of education in our cities. And that, as you may remember, led to years of litigation in New Jersey, first beginning in 1970 with the case of Robinson against Cahill, and then in the 80s and 90s with another case called Abbott versus Burke. When I served on the New Jersey Supreme Court from 1985 to 2002, The Abbott v. Burke case came to our court at least 15 times, but that case addressed only funding and resources, never segregation. The argument made before my court was that it was a violation of the New Jersey Constitution to provide school children in poor urban districts with less money per pupil than the state provided to pupils in the rich suburbs. Our court agreed with that argument. In 1992, we ordered that the state provide funding to the 28 poorest school districts at a level that was equal to the funding in the wealthiest suburban districts. And we did more than that. We also ordered free preschool for all 3- and 4-year-olds in the 28 poorest urban districts. Because I read every word of the trial record in that case, I can tell you that the difference between the resources and the facilities available to a child in Milburn or Princeton as compared to a child in Irvington or Newark was enormous. Children in wealthy suburban districts had the advantage of modern facilities, excellent science labs, computer technology, first-rate athletic fields, and diverse course offerings, whereas the urban school students lacked those advantages. Our court held that that disparity violated the thorough and efficient clause of the New Jersey Constitution, and we ordered remedies that would equalize the resources, but never in that litigation was the issue of racial segregation and socioeconomic segregation directly confronted. And there are other aspects of our history in housing and education that are relevant to this intense segregation we confront today. You all may be aware that New Jersey has a school takeover law. And under that school takeover law, the state of New Jersey has taken over control of 4 large urban districts: Newark, Paterson, Camden, and Jersey City. And yet 3 of those 4 districts, controlled and operated by the state, are among the most segregated public school districts, and the state has never lifted a finger to address that segregation. Our history of housing development also bears on the issue. As many of you know, for decades, New Jersey's suburban municipalities practiced exclusionary zoning, requiring large lots and permitting only single-family homes in their communities. And the result of that zoning was to exclude low and moderate income families from living in many of our suburbs. As a result of that exclusionary zoning, a large percentage of our low-income minority families were forced to find housing in the cities. Now, my court held that that exclusionary zoning was unconstitutional in the Mount Laurel cases, but the damage already had been done. That's not all. Federal agencies of our national government, such as the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the Federal Housing Administration, and the Veterans Administration, had adopted policies that lasted well into the 60s that restricted the availability of federally insured loans to any housing developments in the country that included black families. What that meant was that if banks wanted to give mortgages to homes in a development, and if those mortgages were to be federally insured by the federal government, the federal government's housing policies said to the banks, don't give loans to developments that include black families. Here's a quote from the Federal Housing Administration underwriting manual that was in effect during those years. It says this, quote, "If a neighborhood is to retain stability, it is necessary that property shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. A change in social or racial occupancy generally leads to instability and a reduction in values. As a result of that discriminatory policy by the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA for decades would not provide insured mortgages for developments anywhere in the country that were racially mixed. It's no wonder that the suburbs in New Jersey and in other states developed as they did, given those exclusionary zoning ordinances and the unavailability of mortgages for low and moderate income black families. And so when we look to the future and begin to think about how to address this issue of highly segregated public schools, it's important to understand our history and also to understand that the remedy and the process for eliminating highly segregated public schools is complicated, difficult, and likely to take many years. But a group of educators, lawyers, retired judges, and I have determined that the time to start is now. We've organized a nonprofit corporation called the New Jersey Coalition for Diverse and Inclusive Schools. Through community outreach, education, interaction with government officials, and if necessary, resort to litigation, we're determined that New Jersey begins to address what we think is an egregious failure of state policy. Of course, other states in the country have had to address this issue, particularly the southern states, after Brown against Board of Education. In the 1970s and 80s, most of the southern states, probably all of them, made substantial progress in diversifying their public schools. They used various devices, such as county-wide attendance zones rather than municipal attendance zones like we have. They also created magnet schools. Magnet schools are schools that offer special educational opportunities in certain areas of learning, such as a music and arts magnet school, a computer technology magnet school, or a health science magnet school that's attractive to suburban parents as well as urban parents. Busing, both voluntary and in some cases involuntary, also was involved. But there were many, many success stories in the South and in the North, including Wilmington, Delaware. Some of the most successful desegregation efforts occurred in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg County School District, the Raleigh-Wake County School District in North Carolina, and in Louisville, where originally there was severe resistance to the effort to desegregate, but Louisville has maintained desegregated public schools right through to today. Unfortunately, there's been some backsliding in the South because the federal courts have permitted the Southern school boards to resume control of attendance decisions. And so there's regression in the progress that's occurred in some of those states. More recently, in the North, there's been litigation in Hartford, Connecticut. It's a famous case called the Sheff case. And it's been going on for the past 20 years. It's resulted in a significant movement of black school children from the city of Hartford into diverse schools. Pursuant to that lawsuit, the state of Connecticut and the city of Hartford have created over 50 magnet schools, some in the city, some in the suburbs. Parents, both in the city and suburbs, have voluntarily determined that those magnet schools were so good that they were willing to send their children to magnet schools not within their own municipality. The Connecticut Supreme Court, in its decision, also held that municipal attendance zones violated the state constitution. Now, the Connecticut effort has not been a complete success, and we've been talking at length with the Connecticut lawyers to understand what their successes and what their limitations have been. And so we're going to learn from their successes and their mistakes. But New Jersey also has municipal attendance zones. What I mean by that is that by law in New Jersey, you have to go to school in the municipality in which you live. Obviously, if a municipality like Irvington, where I grew up, is segregated, the public schools will be as well. It's also very important to understand that the charter school movement, which has produced some very successful schools and some schools that are not so successful, has resulted in schools that are even more segregated than the public schools. Why? Because the legislature, in its wisdom, when it passed the charter school law, required that charter schools also had to be organized by municipal boundary. We believe one essential change New Jersey has to make to diversify its public schools is that attendance zones have to be larger geographical areas than one municipality. Probably countywide attendance zones would make more sense, and the same is true for charter schools. As long as attendance zones for public schools and charter schools are limited by municipal boundaries, segregation is an inevitable effect. We appreciate this is a sensitive and difficult issue, and that it will require understanding and a willingness to entertain a fresh approach to the question of where children should go to school and with whom. Because of the Methodist Church's great tradition of support for equal justice and civil rights, I thought that this would be a subject of significant interest to you. We intend to proceed. Thank you. We intend to proceed in a careful, thoughtful, and cautious manner. We understand that change like this is hard to initiate and sustain. We believe that in a society in which a majority of the nation's first-grade public school students today are non-white, that it is very important for both white and minority children to learn in a setting where there are children of different racial and socioeconomic backgrounds. After all, that is a world in which they will live and work when they grow up. And we fail our children as a society if we segregate them in their public school years and then expect them to embrace a racially diverse society when they mature and enter the working world. So that's a brief summary of the problem that confronts New Jersey today. My colleagues and I are determined to start the state in a new direction and to encourage the next governor and the legislature and the Commissioner of Education to begin to take the necessary steps to move New Jersey away from its present status as one of the most racially and economically segregated public school systems in the country to one in which children will attend schools that provide them with an opportunity to meet, study with, play sports with, and learn from children of races and socioeconomic backgrounds different from their own. I hope that if the occasion presents itself, you will be willing to be supportive of that effort. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh.